In this video, we're going to take a look at understanding joints. Joints are used to mimic the functionality of a skeleton. Let's create one. I'm going to switch to the animation menu set and go to Skeleton and click on the Joint tool. To create a joint, I can just click in a viewport and the joints are created. To complete the joint skeleton, I can just hit Enter. A joint skeleton is made of two different parts. First, we have the joint itself. And this is going to be the sphere-like object in between each of these triangular objects. These are our joints. The part going in between them is considered the bone. The bone has no real functionality, and we cannot actually manipulate it. It's really there just for a graphical representation of the connection between each joint. So you can see when I click and select, I'm actually selecting the joint on each of these parts. A joint skeleton is automatically created as we draw new joints, and that bone is connected automatically in between each of those joints. The joint itself is what does all the work. If I select a single joint and hit E for rotate, I can rotate and you'll see that the entire joint chain or joint skeleton rotates. And I'll click on the next one and rotate, and all of the joints that are a child of the one that I'm rotating move with it. Now we can break the connection between each joint by simply unparenting. So if I were to select this joint here and choose Shift P, my hotkey shortcut for unparenting, you'll see that the bone disappears, signifying that there is no longer a connection between those two joints. If I hold Shift and select two joints, starting with the child and then the parent, and hit P, a connection or bone will be made in between them. Joints always use their local coordinates. What this means is that they're all going to go back to the root of their skeleton. So when I move the root, everything moves with it, just like when I did my rotation. But if I go in and scale, you'll see that the root joint does scale, but the other joints around it are not actually scaling. They're moving with it, but there is no scale taking place on those individual joints. I'm going to open up the outliner, and we'll expand this so that we can see the individual joints here. And I'll go through and select each one of these joints independently. Now, when I did select the root, as you can see, it appears that all of the joints have been selected. But what we're really seeing here is just that these are children and we've selected the parent. So I'll go in and select, starting with the last joint there, and I'll hold Control and go up the chain to select them all. Now when I choose to scale, you'll see that all of the joints are now scaling uniformly. And this will also work with translate and rotate. So if I wanted to rotate all of these joints, I need to select all of them and not just select a single joint. Now, no matter what, when we complete the skeleton, it will always end with a single joint. You can see that there is no connecting bone here. If I were to delete that last joint, we'll also lose this bone. That joint will always show up just to show us that it is the end of our joint chain. If we were to add another joint down over here, a bone would then be shown to connect the two together. Now, we never really want to draw our joints in a perspective view. Every time we do so, we run the risk of misplacing our joints. This happens because the joint itself is always going to go to the grid plane. So I'll go back and I'll just choose Joint Tool again from my skeleton menu. And we'll just click out here an empty space just to draw a few more joints, and again, I'll hit enter to complete the skeleton. And if we zoom out, we can then see exactly where those were being drawn. Notice they're all on the grid plane, but they're way out there in space, and so it becomes a little bit hard to control their exact placement. So instead, what we want to do is draw those joints in an orthographic view. So if I were working on a character and I wanted to draw out joints for the character's leg, I might switch to a side view. And again, we'll go over here. I'm just going to grab my last tool used, the icon here, and we'll click on that to activate it. And we'll draw out a simple leg skeleton. We'll put a slight bend in there for the knee, come down for the ankle, and out for the foot. And again, I'll hit enter to complete that. Now, that keeps that skeleton nice and planar. This ensures that our joints will rotate in the proper direction. And we'll switch back to a perspective view and take a look and see those joints were drawn along the YZ plane, just like we saw right here in our side view. And you can see there's our YZ plane. Those joints are now on that plane. Again, that helps keep those joints nice and planar so that they will rotate properly. And so if I were to rotate here about the knee, you can see that it rotates properly right along that Z axis. And it is aligned accordingly. Whenever we create and draw joints, it's very important that when we're done, we return our values, our transforms, back to 0 and 1 respectively on the rotate and scale channel. The translate will never go back to 0 and will never be a specific number except where we actually manipulate the joint to. If I were to take this joint here and set it to 0, you'll see that it flies back to the root. This is what I was referring to earlier as all of our joints use the local axis of their root. So 0 to that knee joint is up there at the hip, at its root. Same thing with the foot. Notice the number is different there. If I set that to 0, it's going to fly to its parent, so on and so forth. So those numbers are never going to go away, but the rotate and scale, they can be changed, and we need to get rid of those values once we apply a skeleton to a character. So if I were to rotate this, and let's say we just want to fit it a little bit better to our character, we'll just kind of give it a little rotation there. Notice I have a value there. What we would end up doing if we like this position is we would freeze those transformations, and we can freeze the joint orient there and freeze that out so that that goes back to 0. And now we have a nice, clean joint structure there, ready to be rigged to a character. And let's just undo that back there a little bit. Something else we can control with our joints is the size or the radius of how those joints are being displayed. You can see right here we have a radius value. If I click on that, the display of my root will change. This does not alter the actual scale. It is merely changing how it's displayed in the viewport. And if I select all of those joints, we can interactively, again, using our middle mouse button, we can change how all of those, or the scale of all of those joints, are displayed in our viewport.